The early 1942nd, Europe is engulfed in flames, its cities trembling under the relentless weight of war, and the dark, heavy shadow of conflict stretches far and wide, touching every corner of the world. Across the restless waters of the Atlantic, a grand passenger ship cuts steadily through the waves, leaving behind the towering skyline of New York as it embarks on a long voyage to Buenos Aires, deep in the heart of South America. On board, a fascinating mosaic of humanity takes shape: diplomats with stern, unreadable faces, sharp-eyed business people chasing opportunities far from the chaos, and intellectuals in quiet exile, clutching books and memories of a home they may never see again. Some passengers linger on the deck, letting the ocean breeze brush gently against their faces as they stare at the endless horizon. Others gather around tables, immersed in the quiet intensity of card games. And a few stand apart in silence, their eyes fixed on the disappearing shape of the continent they've just left behind, weighed down by thoughts too heavy to speak aloud. But the most remarkable passenger is, without a doubt, Mirko Czentovic, the reigning world chess champion. Still in his 20s, he stands as an almost mythical figure in the realm of chess, young, brilliant, and seemingly unbeatable whenever he sits before a chessboard. His movements during a match are precise and deliberate, his demeanor calm and calculating, his victories so consistent that his name echoes like a legend throughout the chess world. To enthusiasts and masters alike, he is both an enigma and an idol, someone whose genius feels mechanical in its accuracy yet incomprehensible in its nature. And yet, beneath this aura of greatness, there lies a peculiarity impossible to ignore. Outside the boundaries of the 64 squares, Czentovic is almost painfully unremarkable. He is a man untouched by the refinements of the world, uneducated, socially awkward, and, at times, shockingly crude. Conversations with him collapse into silence, for he cannot sustain dialogue beyond the simplest phrases. He does not read, does not write, and shows no curiosity for literature, art, or music. It is as if the universe to him exists solely in black and white squares. Chess is not just his passion, it is his entire language, the framework of his thoughts, the measure of his existence. At the board, he transforms into a cold, sharp machine, orchestrating strategies that dazzle even the most seasoned players. Away from it, however, stripped of that one defining context, Mirko Czentovic becomes something startlingly plain, more ordinary even, than the most ordinary man. The passengers, filled with curiosity about this renowned champion, can't resist the urge to see him in action. A few of them band together, determined to challenge him to a game. A small table is arranged in the lounge, the chessboard carefully placed, and soon a crowd gathers around, their eyes fixed on the unfolding spectacle as the first moves are made. As expected, Czentovic dominates effortlessly. He sits with unshakable patience, his gaze sharp and calculating, waiting for the tiniest slip. And when that mistake inevitably comes, he strikes without hesitation, dismantling every defense and extinguishing their brief sparks of confidence, leaving nothing but quiet awe in his wake. Just when it seems that everything is over, when the passengers have resigned themselves to yet another inevitable defeat, a calm but steady voice drifts in from the edge of the crowd. Heads turn instinctively toward the source of the interruption. There, standing slightly apart from the others, is a refined, almost aristocratic-looking passenger, a man who has been silently observing the match from the very beginning, his sharp eyes following every move with quiet intensity. Slowly, he leans forward, his posture composed yet deliberate, and with a quiet authority in his voice, he whispers, "No, don't make that move. If you take this one instead, you can shift the momentum, balance the game." For a moment, the lounge falls into a hushed stillness. The players exchange bewildered glances, unsure how to react, and that is when his presence becomes undeniable. This man, this mysterious, elegant figure, is Dr. B, and with his words, the game and the story itself take a sudden and dramatic turn. At first glance, Dr. B appears to be nothing more than an ordinary passenger, quiet, polite, and almost invisible among the crowd. He carries himself with a calm reserve, the kind of man who avoids drawing attention, who speaks only when spoken to, and even then, keeps his words brief and measured. No one would have guessed that beneath that unassuming exterior lay a mind sharpened to brilliance by unimaginable circumstances. And yet, with a single, almost casual sentence, he alters the entire course of the game. His tone is calm, precise, but carries a quiet authority that no one dares to question. The passengers, intrigued and oddly trusting, follow his advice without hesitation, their hands carefully moving the pieces as instructed, and suddenly, almost magically, the board changes. What seemed like a hopeless match begins to even out, the balance restored move by move, as if an invisible hand is guiding them. For the first time, Chentovic hesitates. The icy confidence that defines the young champion wavers, if only for a moment. He studies the board with narrowed eyes, trying to make sense of what is happening. Before him, it no longer feels as though he is playing against a group of well-meaning amateurs. Instead, it is as though an unseen, silent master has emerged, moving through the passenger's hands and challenging him with a precision that demands his full attention. Around the table, whispers ripple like waves. Every spectator is struck by the same thought, though only a few dare to voice it aloud. Who is this man, and where did he learn to play chess like this? At first, Dr. B offers nothing but silence. His gaze remains steady, detached, almost as if he isn't even present in the room. But silence can only hold for so long. Something in him trembles a weight, a memory too heavy to contain until, at last, the walls he has built around his past begin to crack. And then, with a quiet exhale, Dr. B begins to speak, slowly, reluctantly, as though each word costs him something. And what follows is not just a story, but a confession, the most merciless, harrowing tale of his life. Dr. B is no ordinary man. In Austria, his name carries quiet weight, a highly respected lawyer, trusted by the wealthiest and most influential aristocratic families in the country. For years, he has been the discreet guardian of their fortunes, overseeing vast accounts, estates, and businesses with impeccable precision. But more than their wealth, he holds something far more valuable: their secrets. Every contract, every hidden deal, every confidential letter has at some point passed through his careful hands. These secrets, intimate, powerful, and sometimes dangerous, are like invisible threads connecting Dr. B not only to the upper crust of society, but also, indirectly, to the very machinery of power itself. He knows who truly holds influence, which alliances are genuine, and which are a delicate facade. Then the world begins to change. Nazi Germany sweeps across Europe, its shadow stretching into Austria. The country falls, almost overnight, under the suffocating grip of occupation. And in this new, terrifying order, men like Dr. B are not just valuable, they are indispensable. To the Gestapo, he represents a living archive, a key to information that could tighten their control over the old aristocracy and anyone tied to it. One cold morning, the inevitable comes. A sharp knock echoes against his front door, too sharp, too precise to be anything ordinary. Before he can even gather his thoughts, the door swings open. Uniformed soldiers stand there, their boots glinting under the morning light, their faces expressionless, efficient. Without explanation, without the formality of an accusation or a warrant, they take him away. No trial, no written charges, just silence and the beginning of an endless, suffocating wait. They confine him within 4 suffocating walls, a room stripped bare of life. No books to read, no paper to write on, no pen to hold. Not a voice to answer his, not even a distant sound to remind him that a world still exists beyond that cell. It is a punishment far more insidious than any physical torture. Pain can be endured, suffering can be resisted. But the emptiness, that unbearable, endless emptiness, begins to gnaw at the mind like a slow, relentless poison. Hours stretch into days, days bleed into weeks, and weeks dissolve into months. Time becomes meaningless, a shapeless blur in the quiet. In that void, Dr. B's mind, once sharp and disciplined, begins to drift like a ship without a rudder. Thoughts race, collide, spiral, until even his own inner voice turns cruel, echoing his fears back at him, louder with each passing day. Occasionally, the door bursts open, and he is led down dim, cold corridors for questioning. Yet, even these interrogations, harsh as they are, become almost a relief, a brief interruption to the silence that devours him. But the questions end, and each time he is dragged back to that cell, to the same oppressive quiet that feels heavier than iron chains. In the end, it is not starvation, nor beatings, nor the threat of death that breaks a man. It is silence, silence, sharp and merciless, that drives the mind to the brink of collapse. Then, one day, something almost miraculous happens. During yet another round of questioning, the same endless, draining routine, a careless officer makes a simple mistake. In his jacket pocket, as if forgotten, lies a small, worn-out book. And in that moment of rare opportunity, when no one is looking, Dr. B slips it quietly into his own coat, his heart pounding as though he has just stolen a piece of freedom itself. Back in the cell, with trembling hands, he pulls out the prize and opens it, desperate for words, for sentences, for something, anything to ignite his starving mind. But what greets him is not a novel filled with stories, not a law text to engage his analytical mind, not even poetry to soothe his restless thoughts. No, what he finds are pages filled only with chess notations, game after game, line after line, the precise moves of old tournaments, laid out like cryptic codes. For a fleeting moment, a crushing sense of disappointment sweeps over him, months of suffocating silence, of waiting, and this is all there is, just numbers, squares, and symbols. He almost laughs at the bitter irony of it. But then, slowly, the realization dawns. This book, this unassuming little volume of forgotten games, is not meaningless at all. In fact, it is everything. It is structure, it is strategy. It is complexity, and above all, it is the single thread that can keep his unraveling mind tethered, his only hope to survive the endless void. He begins to memorize the moves, at first slowly, carefully, tracing each notation in his mind until the numbers and letters begin to form patterns. In the stillness of his cell, with nothing but the echo of his own breath, he closes his eyes and imagines a chessboard stretched out on the cold, empty floor. Square by square, piece by piece, he rebuilds the game in his imagination, the pawns in their neat rows, the rooks like silent sentinels, the knights poised to leap, the queen waiting in quiet power. And then, in his mind, the game begins. Day after day, hour after endless hour, he replays the matches. He follows each opening, every move, every subtle variation. The silence that once gnawed at his sanity now becomes the perfect space for focus, for discipline. The clinking of imaginary pieces, the soundless rhythm of play, becomes his only escape, his refuge from the four walls that hold him prisoner. Over time, the repetition transforms into something more. Chess stops being just a distraction. It becomes his salvation. Within those imagined squares, within the endless combinations of attack and defense, he rediscovers a sense of control, a fragile thread of order in the chaos of captivity. And in that fragile thread, his mind begins to hold on fiercely, desperately, to the only thing keeping it alive. Over time, this quiet practice evolves into something far more consuming. At first, Dr. B is merely a student carefully memorizing the patterns of others, replaying the strategies of grandmasters long gone. But as the days blur together in that endless confinement, something shifts. He no longer limits himself to what is written in the small, tattered book. He begins to create, to experiment, to invent. Soon, the games he imagines are no longer echoes of others' battles but his own, born entirely within the isolated theater of his mind. And then, without even realizing it, he splits himself in two. On one side of the imagined board, white Dr. B, calm, calculating, deliberate. On the other, black Dr. B, ruthless, relentless, ready to exploit the smallest weakness. It becomes a strange, solitary ritual. He sits in the same empty room, his eyes shut tight, and in that void he orchestrates match after match, a silent war raging between two halves of himself. Hours bleed into days, days into weeks, in an unbroken sequence of games. But what begins as salvation slowly twists into something darker. What once kept him sane now starts to consume him. The line between discipline and obsession blurs until it disappears altogether. His mind becomes an endless chessboard, every thought, every breath, every heartbeat reduced to strategies, positions, and moves. Sleep abandons him. Even in the rare moments of rest, phantom games play out behind his closed eyelids. The silence that once sheltered him now feels suffocating, filled with the ghostly clatter of pieces that only he can hear. And then, one day, it happens. At the very peak of an intense, imagined game, when the balance of the match hangs by a single, fragile thread, his body betrays him. His hands begin to tremble violently, his vision blurs, and a sharp, searing pain splits through his skull. His mind, stretched too far and too long, finally collapses under the unbearable strain. He falls, shaking uncontrollably, as if the invisible pieces scattered across his mental chessboard have all crashed down at once. In that single, terrifying moment, a brutal clarity pierces through the chaos. the realization that chess, the one thing that had kept him alive through the endless solitude, has also driven him to the edge of his sanity. It has been both his refuge and his torment, his salvation and the slow, merciless path to madness. Years later, carrying the weight of that haunting past, Dr. B finds himself face to face with Chentovic aboard the ship bound for Buenos Aires. The lounge is hushed, the air electric with anticipation as the two sit across from one another, a simple chessboard between them, but for Dr. B, it feels like far more than a game. It is the first true test of the mind he once sharpened in the silence of his prison. From the very first move, it becomes clear to everyone watching, Dr. B is no ordinary opponent. His brilliance unfolds effortlessly across the board, each move precise, confident, and surgically calculated. The passengers lean closer, their whispers fading into silence as they witness a duel of rare intensity. Piece by piece, Dr. B corners the champion, dictating the rhythm of the match. Chentovic, usually calm and unreadable, finds himself forced into deep concentration, his usual mask of icy detachment beginning to crack ever so slightly. The passengers hold their breath, eyes fixed on the game, sensing that they are witnessing something extraordinary, a man who had been buried in solitude, now revealing the sharp, unyielding genius forged in the crucible of his suffering. But in the rematch, the atmosphere shifts. From the very first moves, something feels different. Dr. B, who had been the picture of calm precision in the first game, begins to falter. His hands tremble subtly at first, then more noticeably, as if guided by a memory buried deep within him. His sharp, steady gaze grows distant, unfocused, as though the walls of the ship's lounge are fading away, dissolving into the cold, suffocating confines of that solitary cell from years ago. The board before him no longer belongs to this moment. The present slips away. Every sound in the room, the low hum of the ship's engines, the quiet breaths of the passengers vanishes into nothingness. All that remains is the echo of silence and the ghostly presence of the Black Dr. B sitting across from him, ready to strike. His moves grow faster, more frantic. Precision gives way to impatience, calculation to compulsion. He mutters under his breath, barely coherent, the words tumbling out in a fevered rhythm only he understands. Each piece he moves is no longer a strategy, it's survival, an instinctual reaction against an opponent that exists only within his fractured mind. And then, suddenly, it happens. In the middle of the tense silence, Dr. B pushes back his chair and rises abruptly to his feet. His voice, sharp and trembling, cuts through the room like a blade. "No, I cannot. I will not. Continue. Never again. I will never play chess again." For a moment, the room is frozen. No one dares to speak, no one dares to move. The great duel is over, not with a victory, but with the haunting collapse of a man who has fought too long against his own mind. The room falls into a heavy, almost sacred silence. The chessboard sits between them, frozen mid-game, the pieces suspended in a quiet tableau that will never find its conclusion. Did Chentovic win? Perhaps, perhaps not. But in this moment, the outcome of the match no longer matters. Because what has unfolded here is not just a contest of strategy, not merely a game between two players. It is something far deeper, the raw and fragile story of a mind stretched to its limits. Chess, for Dr. B, has been more than a pastime. It was his refuge, the lifeline that kept him tethered to reality in the unbearable void of isolation. But that same lifeline, pulled too tightly, became the chain that nearly destroyed him. This is where the brilliance of the game collapses into its own darkness. The very mind that had clung so desperately to the 64 squares, that had found solace in the precision of the pieces, is the same mind that now trembles under the weight of its own power, a mind caught between genius and madness. In this story, chess ceases to be a game and becomes a metaphor, a delicate, dangerous balance. It is the thin, razor-sharp line between survival and surrender, between reason and delirium, between freedom and the invisible prison of one's own thoughts. And through this haunting tale, Zweig leaves us with a quiet, devastating truth. Sometimes, the greatest victory is not in winning, not in mastering the board, but in walking away and finding the strength to let the game go, before it consumes you entirely. Chess stands as one of Stefan Zweig's most powerful and haunting works, written during the final turbulent years of his life. Every line carries the quiet weight of a man who had seen the world fracture, who had witnessed the collapse of empires, the rise of tyranny, and the unbearable loneliness of exile. This story is not only Dr. B's struggle, it is also Zweig's own unspoken confession. Within the claustrophobic walls of that imagined cell, we glimpse the author himself, a brilliant mind wrestling with isolation, fear, and the shadows of a world spiraling into chaos. And yet, woven into the tragedy is a subtle, urgent whisper. The human mind is limitless. It can create, survive, and endure the unimaginable. But sometimes the greatest act of courage is not in pressing forward, not in fighting to the very end, but in choosing to step back and deciding, with quiet strength, to lay down the pieces and let the game end.